Hello everyone, Namaste. Welcome to the 100th edition of the Bharatvaarta Weekly. That's right, you heard it right. It's the 100th edition of the Bharatvaarta Weekly. We've been doing this for 100 weeks now. When we started out, it was a very simple hypothesis that we wanted to just look back at the news and events of the week that was and really talk about things that are important in a rational, sane way, quite in contrast to the blaring headlines that you often hear on the news media. And we hope that we've been able to achieve that over the week, over the years now. Thanks also to everyone who supported us in this journey. It really means a lot to us, to Nirav, Abhishek, and myself, that you guys tune in every week to listen to what we have. Really means a lot. Thank you so much for that, Abhishek, Nirav. The 100th weekly. What do you guys feel?
No, it's like a fantastic thing. It's like I'm surprised at our own consistency within like across like people's travel plan and some people being available, not available through COVID, through everything. I think all of us have come together and actually even for myself, just by being on the show or reading up before makes me more informed of the current affairs as well, right? So it's been a good habit, upward and onward. And Bharat Varta, apart from the weekly, right, like the regular week, the episodes during the week are also like really fantastic. So I started off as a listener and then became a contributor, so feels really nice.
Yeah, thank you, Nirav, and thank you, Abhishek, as well, for being an integral part of the journey. Really, it's been amazing fun catching up with you guys on the weekend and talking about the news. Thanks also to a very talented producer, Anirudh, who you don't hear and see, but it's been a rare pleasure working with you folks. All right. Well, like always, we'll bring you the news and events of the week that was, and it was quite an eventful week, I should say. Kingfisher Tycoon Vijay Mallya was sentenced to jail. Finally, RBI's new measures, couple of those, one to position the rupee as a currency for international trade, and the other against the BNPL startups that have come up. Then there was the CAATSA waiver by the US. Then we had a new nomination for the vice president, Mr. Jagdeep Dhankar. And also, we had an interesting showdown between the Chief Justice N.V. Ramana and Minister Kiran Rijiju. All of this and more. Before that, we should talk about the episode that we put out last week, right? Abhishek, did you happen to catch the episode?
Yes, yeah, definitely watched it. So, as usual, right, as we expect from Mr. Gokhale, very insightful on a number of topics. I think we initially thought it would be purely a discussion on the Sri Lanka situation, but the discussion moved along quite seamlessly to a number of topics, and especially on his, particular area of expertise, which is the India-China relation. And so he gave a lot of, insightful views and also some, let's say, little alarming predictions on the possibility of an India-China skirmish or war breaking out in the next few months, right? And a lot of that has to do with how the internal politics of the CCB and how Xi Jinping is feeling about his position within the party and all that, and how that plays out, and how he might use another border conflict with India to sort of strengthen his position in the party.
Definitely an interesting episode. Do check it out if you haven't already. Wide varying conversation on geopolitics and wonderfully marshaled by Velina Chakrova as well. All right, let's move on to the first piece of news. Kingfisher Tycoon Vijay Mallya has been sentenced to jail. The Supreme Court has sentenced Tycoon Vijay Mallya to 4 months in jail for disobeying an earlier court judgment linked to the collapse of his airline. India has previously made efforts to extradite the former billionaire, who is believed to be in London. Mr. Mallya has fought extradition from the UK to India, where he faces charges including fraud. Mr. Mallya faces a number of charges related to alleged financial irregularities at Kingfisher Airlines. He left India in 2016 after defaulting on debts of more than $1 billion. Well, Nirav, I think this was long expected. 4 months in jail. What do you think about it?
Okay, so while he has like a lot of cases pending against him, the particular case where he's been sentenced is that he has transferred $40 million to his relatives while not paying his other debts, defaulting on other debts, right? So this money from Kingfisher Airlines was due to the creditors of Kingfisher rather than his own family members. Within the creditors, it is employees, it is people who have lent them money, it is like suppliers, say possibly for fuel, etc. Right? So they have so on this particular default, what he's been told is to one is pay $40 million plus 8% interest since 2016. He's been told a 2,000 rupee fine, which tells you like some of our court judgments or courts how kind of like out of touch, or maybe these are all hard coded in the legal framework over a long time, But like 2,000 rupees seems like a very trivial amount. His sentence is 4 months, and if he is unable to pay the 40 million plus the fine, it can be extended to 2 more months. So this seems like very trivial compared to like what the amount was there. Anyways, the good thing is he has been sentenced to jail. There has been proper due process which has been followed. There's a lot of legal backlog. I do agree that it's maybe probably a bit too late, but still, Vijay Mallya, with the best of lawyers, couldn't get a judgment in his favor, which shows that at least he was given a fair chance to prove his side, right? And as per the law of the land, whatever is the punishment has been given. Now the question is, how do we extradite him out from UK or wherever else now he might have gone from UK, right? We wouldn't know that at the moment, or at least as like contributors to Bharatvaarta. Maybe the Indian authorities do know, but it is about getting him back and also trying to get the money back to pay the creditors of Kingfisher Airlines. The biggest one was UCO Bank, but obviously there are a lot of them, including the employees who are not paid salary for about 15 months. It's a positive development. We've had quite a few fugitives, big defaulters who run out of India. I think the good part, so one is a bad part about the legal system is the backlog, but the good part is that we are following due process and not declaring people guilty unless proven, right, in court. Yeah, there's like the positive angle to look at it. Like the judgment has been done, but like it's to effectively give the punishment, we need to get him back. And maybe this case might go in appeal. Maybe there might be, if he can like pay back the money or something, there could be some sort of leniency or clemency if he cooperates. So this is not over yet, but the first step, this has been done, and I think it's a very positive thing. Hopefully we kind of move ahead like on similar cases. There are quite a few, one of them being my namesake Nirav Modi, another one being another Lalit Modi, so who's again in the news for other reasons. So
Lalit Modi just took the internet by storm last week, right? I mean, good for him. The US House of Representatives have voted for an India specific CAATSA waiver. The legislative amendment was introduced by Indian American Congressman Ro Khanna. It urges the Biden administration to provide India with a CAATSA waiver to help deter aggressors like China. In his remarks on the House floor, Mr. Khanna said there is no relationship of greater significance to the US strategic interests than the India US partnership. The legislation says that United States India Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies (ICET) is a welcome and essential step to developing closer partnerships between the two countries. Abhishek, this is pretty significant, right?
Yeah, so if you recall our episode on India America relations with Ashish and Sunanda ji, right? We had discussed this topic in details there, right? And we were all of the opinion that it will be tough, but I think India will definitely get the waiver in the end, right? So just to give a recap for folks, this CATSA Act basically talks about sanctioning countries who have significant transactions with three of America's adversaries, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And India, by buying the S-400 missile defense systems, was definitely in violation of this act, right? With another country which had purchased those missiles was Turkey, and they had been sanctioned under this. In the last few years, India-America relations have been on an improving trend, I would say, with the added importance of the threat of China on various fronts, right? I think the Americans are now quite vocal about it on various forums, right? Whether it is the Quad or whether it is, even in their domestic politics, right? Past, I think, as you said, in a bipartisan way with about 330 out of 420 votes approximately in the House. Only five Democrats voted against it and about 85 Republicans. Now, the five Democrats who voted against this were all members of the what Trump coined the squad, right? It was people like AOC, Rashiba Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar, etc., who were the five who did not vote in favor of this CATSA waiver for India. Why the Republicans voted, some of the Republicans voted against it, is not yet clear, but some of it could be just partisan politics, that I will just oppose anything which the ruling party proposes, right? Without really any logic to it. So yeah, I think the next steps are that the Senate will probably do a bipartisan, passage of similar amendment, right? And then it's up to the White House, right? The President Joe Biden to then finally ratify it. But yeah, I think overall this is a pretty good step for India US relations, because all it would do is actually, I don't think any particular CAATSA sanction would hurt India too much, but it would definitely sour the relations between the two countries, right? And provide a roadblock. I think it makes pragmatic sense for the Americans to sort of do this. One of the interesting things he talked about while talking on this on the floor was that, look, India is dependent on Russian weapons. That is a sort of legacy issue. What we need to do as Americans is also to provide India with, options for buying from America, right? And so I think this is kind of the things that all of us talked about, right? When there was a lot of noise about India buying Russian oil or not condemning Russia in the UN, right? And that is because India has legacy dependence on Russia and its arms system. So good to see US politicians also recognizing it, even though Twitter think tankers were going ballistic about India and Russia, but at least their politicians are having more sanity than their Twitter think tankers.
Yeah. Also, it's a useful lesson that you should always negotiate from a position of strength, right? I mean, Abhishek, we did this episode a long while back, which you referenced, right? The one on how India-US relations will change under the Biden administration. Looking back, I think we probably did that in Jan of this year, right? Or probably last year. Uh, Last year, right? Looking back, I mean, how do you think that has played out?
I think we got pretty much all our predictions spot on. And that is despite so many dramatic world events happening, right? From
Yeah.
Afghanistan to Ukraine. I think pretty much all our predictions were spot on. And that kind of shows that the India US relationship is now on a much more predictable and stable trajectory, right? Because of, let's say, the work done in the last 20 years from Bush, Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, Obama, Modi, Trump, Biden, right? All the leaders have sort of been positive and committed to this relationship.
Yeah, do go back and listen to that episode. We'll probably link it in the description. It was with Abhishek, Ashish, and Sunanda ji, and quite a wide varying conversation as well on various facets of how the India-US relationship can, potentially change with the new administration or then new administration. Moving on, the RBI has put up a new mechanism in place to facilitate international trade in rupees. This move will allow India to facilitate trades with countries under sanction like Iran and Russia. It will also increase the strength of the rupee in forex trade. All exports and imports under this arrangement may be denominated and invoiced in Indian rupees, and the exchange rate between the currencies of the two trading partner countries may be market determined. Indian exporters using this mechanism will be paid the export proceeds in INR from the balances in the designated special Vostro account of the correspondent bank of the partner country. Nirav, we did an episode along with Mohal on the reserve currency and so on, and I think one of the thesis in that episode was that this dollar as the unanimous standard for reserve currency is definitely going to change. We're already seeing plenty of action around that. So first of all, could you explain this in simpler terms, what it means, right?
Sure.
And
So
also
say,
talk about the significance of it. Yeah.
so for example, I think basically when India buys oil from Russia or from UAE or Saudi Arabia, right? The payment is made in dollars. So that was previously. So say like let's take an example with UAE, where India buys oil from UAE. So India needs to have dollars in its account. Then UAE, all the oil that it sells globally will have always some surplus dollar in its account. So everybody needs to have dollar cash balances. When a bank has dollar deposits, then they need to have some dollar loans with that money that they have. Which usually they buy US treasuries, right? So, what this has done globally is that there is a need for everybody to hold some surplus cash in dollars, right? So it is a global reserve currency. Everybody needs, because your payments, there could be some, we won't always operate like a just in time framework. So everybody needs dollars to settle any global trade. Let it be two different countries, India buying mobile phones from China, same thing, right? Both will have to have some surplus cash kept in dollars. So this is why there was excess demand for dollars. Also, this allowed that US feels that you are not complying with values which I hold, or you're not doing. It could be the global policeman, that Venezuela is doing something which I don't like, or North Korea is doing something which I don't like, or Sudan is doing something which I don't like, Libya. I can freeze your dollar accounts, right? I can remove you from SWIFT, which is the payment system. It's a European system for cross-border trade. So this kind of allowed them. This gives US a bit of leverage, right? So now what has happened is the oil trade, which is the pretty much the biggest component, but also arms, for example, which India buys from Russia, will now, even if it is referenced in say US dollar, that you say, okay, oil price is $105 per barrel, convert that into Indian rupees, multiply by 79 point something, and this many rupees India will pay Russia, and we have a rupee ruble line. So there's a system of nostro vostro account. So basically, Russia having an account in India in rupees is a vostro account, and the corresponding account is a nostro account, right? Both India and Russia will have settle their trade in rupees or rubles. India has a trade deficit versus Russia right now. So either now there is two things. One is maybe Indian exporters of manufactured goods. So probably Russia buys some cars from India, or so hypothetically could buy Mahindra or Tata Safari SUVs, or buy like Indian motorcycles or other manufactured goods. Maybe India give contracts to Indian software services providers, or with the surplus rupees that they have in their account, maybe they can buy gold, or probably buy like Indian government bonds or Indian corporate bonds, etc. Right? Keep some cash money in rupees. So what this does at the margin, even if global trade is denominated in dollars, at the margin, both these countries need to hold a little bit less dollars in their accounts, right? Russia's anyways banned, so this takes out a little bit demand for US government debt. If more countries around the world start doing this, you will see that the marginal demand reduces a bit. This is not any catastrophe. This doesn't change much. Global trade is still denominated in US dollars. It's an easier function. US, however, kind of brickbats that it gets, moving to like China, which is like a much bigger trade partner to the whole world now compared to the US, probably is worse. That China could be like a much stricter policeman and seize your assets. So that might be even worse. So people are not going to move away easily from dollars, but this gives something of a sidesteps sanctions, right? And this allows like a kind of a like parallel shunt route for global trade to go on. Right now, what is happening is India is buying Russian crude at a discount. India is importing more crude than it can consume. So now it's selling refined products like diesel apparently to Europe. So instead of European countries buying Russian crude, refining it and producing diesel, they are buying it via India. But that is the way it is. This is like much bigger transportation costs, much bigger insurance costs. But finally, the consumer is paying more over there, which is leading to higher inflation. And this is the kind of payments facility which has been done. So this is an immediate effect. It's probably just Russia and Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka right now, India has given it a credit line in rupees. Using those rupees, they can import things from India. They are facing a crisis as well at the moment. They have a big shortage of US dollars. So instead of India lending US dollars from its own reserves, India is lending out rupees. So this is one thing. Finally, if we really expand this further, right? We are not going to see much bigger impact as much as like people might want to hype it up, because right now India imports more than it exports, and for other countries, rupee is not freely convertible. You can't easily convert rupees to something else and move it out, trade it all around the world. Like say between India and China or India and Saudi, we can transact in dollars. Two different countries can't transact in rupees. So rupees, you have to end up buying things from India. But India is trying to build up its manufacturing base, manufacturing core. India is trying to liberalize its agriculture. See, we kind of had a lot of export bans on agriculture, but now slowly and steadily we want to move away from growing only cereals, which are just held in FCI godowns, to maybe growing more fruits, vegetables, flowers, and like other value-added products which can be exported. So hopefully India moves towards a more balanced trade, and Indian software exports also grow. Not just the traditional big software companies, but SaaS companies, software as a service companies like Zoho, and there are many other startups in this field, right? So once that happens, maybe rupee will be a little more freely traded. But earlier, see, our mindset of RBI and the regulators and the Indian government was that Indian rupee was always maintained at a level which was like kind of overvalued versus what it should have been, and hence we don't want to invoice it. What if other people take the currency, or what if other people short sell the currency, etc., etc. We're trying to slowly open up our capital account, right? We've in in 99 2000 we allowed foreigners to invest in Indian equities. That has gone quite well. We've seen like VCs putting in money. You've seen like foreign direct investment starting from 1991. Actually, since early 80s, it's like Hero Honda and Maruti were set up, right? So we've seen like some progressive steps over a period of time, and this is just another step. It is not a magic bullet. This is not going to change much. Rupee is not going to strengthen just because of this. At the margin, right now, only two major cases are it facilitates trade between Russia and India, and it facilitates India giving aid to Sri Lanka, which in rupees, in Indian rupees, not Sri Lankan rupees. In Indian rupees, it's a lot easier, and maybe this sets up all the infrastructure further down the line. I think Indian UPI and in Singapore, they wanted to have a connect where remittances, say like people like me in Singapore, if I want to transfer money to my friends or family members, that would make it easier and like frictionless. So those things are all in the pipeline. This will happen, and this is quite a prudent step. Like it was kind of required. This is also telling rest of the world that like India will do things in its own interest and is not going to follow other people's lines or like other people's diktats. And India has the infrastructure to sidestep certain regulations which may not, or like some sanctions which India may not agree with, right? Or may not be in India's best interest. So that's a good thing. It's a good signal as well. But economic impact, I would say, is marginal at best. The next thing you mentioned was about like the regulation on BNPL. See, banks. We had a episode and we discussed this earlier about like the NBFCs and banking
I think,
licenses.
Nirav, before that, I think we should just clarify. So the Reserve Bank has also made a new rule to disallow loading prepaid payment instruments, PPI, basically, and this will impact around 8-10 million customers who are part of this buy now, pay later universe, right? And that is what Nirav is going to talk about.
Yeah, so on the buy, see what is there is all these buy now pay later, right? Or like any form of lending. It is you're borrowing short term because all these entities they all borrow short term deposits and then they lend you long term, right? It is all fine until you can't roll over your liabilities, right? Or you have like a lot of asset quality deterioration where there are a lot of defaults. So this part is, see, buy now pay later is always like feels always good in a bull market cycle when things are all going fine. Everybody wants to repay their debt, right? Everybody who takes a loan says, oh, you know what, I feel I want to make this impulsive purchase. It makes me feel happy for the moment. I'll go and buy like a fancy watch or a new mobile phone or some speakers or whatever it is, right? New clothes, and I'll pay it over a period of time. But people, sometimes there are like adverse effects. People lose their jobs, people have other emergency expenses and they can't pay back. And then there is some people who are willful defaulters who may have the ability but not the desire to pay, right? The intention to. So these things actually, like, which tells you like the whole system is actually like fragile, or like you can say it has negative skew or negative convexity, that you make a little bit of money, which is a spread on your loans between the rate that you lend out to and the rate you borrow. Or in the case of a bank, you borrow from depositors and you lend out to borrowers. This spread is very small, and so you can't have NPAs more than 3-4%. It kind of hits your income profits, right? So and that is why banks everywhere in the world, they are very well regulated entities. They have to follow a lot of regulatory ratios. They need to put a certain amount aside as cash reserve ratio, some in like government debt, etc., right? So NBFCs, which are non-banking finance companies, were like a little bit light touch regulation. Like this was like a regulatory loophole which a lot of people exploited, could grow fast. You could have like more leverage in the system. For housing finance companies, actually that has been kind of like clamped down a bit, which is one of the reasons why HDFC Limited and HDFC Bank are merging, right? Because now there is no regulatory advantage of having a separate housing finance company. So rather just merge it with the bank anyway. So that has been one thing. But so these buy now pay later companies are even very lightly regulated, right? So I think that is where RBI has come in and been prudent, because what happens is in like an upcycle, in a VC fueled boom, everybody starts to grow very fast. And when you grow very fast, you lend out money freely, assuming that the growth is enough that you can handle a few defaults and a few adverse events. But when the tide turns, right, this is always, it hits very badly. And then that time, the losses have to be eventually socialized because some people start complaining, etc. And politically, it's a very difficult problem. So RBI here is trying to be a bit more prudent, trying to keep this. If you want to have like a buy now, pay later system, you can use credit cards, or there are like other regulated NBFCs. I'm not promoting anyone, but like one of the name which comes to my mine is Bajaj Finance, right? Like just as a retail consumer. So there are other avenues. Maybe the whole BNPL needs to be regulated a bit better. Also, there is a whole concept about predatory lending, right? Or like usury lending, where people are like incentivized and they don't read fine print, don't get the difference between a simple and compound interest, and at what frequency is it compounded. So whole thing needs a little bit of regulation. There are other avenues. There are credit cards, there are bank loans, there are, I don't know, debit card loans, etc. There is like financing provided by the seller themselves. So there are multiple other avenues. So this is just a place where there's some regulation needed, because unchecked growth in these areas, right, they are sowing the seeds for the next crisis. So I think it's just prudent. RBI, yes, you can accuse them of being more conservative than what they should be at times. Maybe they are right now, but I kind of agree with the steps taken. Maybe there has to be some discussion with all these lenders, and some middle ground could be found. But this is, I think, a fair, prudent regulation before any crisis hits us.
Yeah, I could not agree more, actually, right? Because, see, these are realms where I don't think it can function in a completely laissez faire kind of a fashion, right? Nobody is arguing that, BNPL is not useful. In fact, in a country like India, which is so famously credit starved, and where, less than 3% of people own credit cards and so on, alternate forms of funding, financing, credit is always welcome, right? But, few things that Nirav mentioned, I think, which we should talk about. One is that lending is essentially a collections business, right? Finding credit worthy people or institutions is very important, and there is usually a lag between the cycle of lending or dispersals and collections, right? And so if you're not prudent in that first aspect of that cycle, it can hit you very badly at the latter aspect, right? And we've seen the debt and NPA crisis 3-4 years back, and one of the great things is that we've been able to come out of that, right? And a lot of cleanup has happened on that front. And if you look at the retail aspect of things, right, I mean, lot of the BNPL folks right now, at least the startups, the products are basically funding consumption, right? I mean, these are not people who are buying to, let's say, invest in businesses, or invest in education, or something which is a meaningful investment, right? I mean, these are people who are perhaps buying a pair of sneakers, or something else, which is well, I mean, no judgment here, but it is what it is, right? It's funding for consumption. And if it is unchecked, right, this can totally lead people to ruin, right? I mean, you've seen this play out in the US, for example, right, where debt is such a huge problem. I mean, you have this concept of payday loans, for instance, and that has just spiraled out of control there, right? And some of the interest charges that the BNPL folks charge, right, I mean, is insane, right? I have seen one kid pay 16% interest for a late payment, 16-17%, right? I mean, there are checks and balances in terms of who you give a credit card to, right? I mean, it's not easily available. You have to have a certain set of credit scores to be able to avail that facility. But imagine, someone in college, or much less in school, having to pay 16-17% interest, right? I mean, you're leading that person to ruin, right? The other thing is, now that the funding cycle has turned, right, we've seen, for instance, Klarna, which was one of the largest BNPL startups, take a haircut of almost 85% in their valuation, right? The valuation dropped from 45-46 billion down to 6 or 7 billion. Now, with that happening, all of these folks are pressed for profitability, right? I mean, all of these folks have that pressure to turn over a dollar. And my hunch, my guess is that they will start squeezing the juice out of all of their users and customers, right? Because the party has clearly ended, right? Even in India, which has as much of a runway, because I mean, we are not overly financialized like the rest of the countries, and we have really a long way to go. Even here, I think mindless customer acquisition through offers and discounts will slow down, at least if not end. So definitely the right move by RBI to look at this space and kind of regulate it. I would only say that RBI should perhaps work in cohesion with some of these entities, right? Keep them informed on their thinking in terms of why they're considering policy and regulation on this front, and actively work to sort of clear the ambiguity and open it up for innovation, because God knows we need credit, right, in this country, for sure. So Nirav, I mean, we spoke about India US relations before this, right? I mean, in. I wonder, how this whole rupee as international currency would kind of affect. What do you think?
So I think the US would look at it as there has to be some sort of trade between India and Russia. Like it's something which they don't want, but they can't really avoid, right? And so they're just going to like look away. Earlier, India had this with Iran as well, where India imported oil from Iran, and Iran had an account with UCO Bank. They imported, I think, rice and wheat from India, but the rest of the balances were just kept in the Vostro account in India, right? So that was there, where till like some point where they could buy enough from us. So the other thing is, what will probably happen is that say there are countries where India has like a trade surplus. Say for example, maybe Sri Lanka, and maybe Russia wants to buy tea from Sri Lanka, for example. Now with the rupee in their account, they can buy tea from Sri Lanka and settle in rupees. But even look at like whatever trade India has with the trade partners. I think India's biggest trade partner is actually China right now. Then second is I think US. Third is UAE, where traditionally we've always been buying most of our oil from UAE and then Saudi, right? So for India's trade itself, Russia and Sri Lanka falls like way behind, right? So this is not going to change much. This is not going to change much. US, while it is aware, sometimes it might just be allowing these things as sort of like a necessary step. And US right now needs India a lot more as a counterweight to China. That is why similarly CAATSA waiver has been given, etc., etc. And China has been trying to settle its trade in renminbi, Chinese yuan, for like a long time. So that has been happening marginally in steps. A lot of the loans on the Belt and Road Initiative are in Chinese renminbi. So they give a loan to you in Chinese yuan, which you give back to the Chinese contractors who kind of build it. Like for example, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, right? You are given a loan, and then all that money goes back to Chinese contractors, and you're left paying interest on the loan back. So that has been happening. Maybe like as we discussed with Mohan, more and more countries might do this at the margin, but for now, I don't see the global trade or the prices being discovered in another currency. Like you will say that yes, price of crude oil is still so many dollars, US dollars per barrel, which converted at today's rate for Indian rupee or like in Russian ruble, this is the equivalent amount in this currency, and we will transact in that. So it kind of sidesteps the payment, but I don't think the US or in change in the reserve currency changes. Maybe if all of this happens more, we will see less amount of dollars being held in spare accounts. But it is like, to be frank, it's marginal at best. It is maybe it's a step towards a multipolar world, but it is first step in like a, I don't know, kilometers
Yeah.
long journey, right? So
Well, all right. On the national front, Mr. Jagdeep Dhankar has been nominated as the BJP's vice president candidate. The announcement was made by BJP chief JP Nadda following the party's parliamentary board meeting held in Delhi. Mr. Nadda said Dhankarji is a Kisan Putra, or a son of a farmer, who established himself as a people's governor. Mr. Modi was all praise for the new candidate, tweeting that Mr. Dhankar was known for his humility and brings with him an illustrious legal, legislative, and gubernatorial career. Well, Abhishek, you have someone from your state, rise up to be VP. What do you think?
Yeah, so to be precise, Mr. Dhankar is from Rajasthan actually. He's been
But he's
the
the West Bengal governor, right?
governor of West Bengal since 2019. So yeah, as you said, he comes from a Jat farmer family, and perhaps the son of a farmer tag is somewhat important in the political context today, with BJP trying to improve its image, in the Western UP, Haryana, Rajasthan belt, Punjab belt, in light of the farmers' agitation on the farm laws, right? Coming to Mr. Dhankar, he's an advocate who's practiced at High Court, Supreme Court for many years. I think he was a minister firstly he was an MLA and in Rajasthan Assembly, and then an MP. Or I think he started off in the Janta Dal, right? And he was part of the cabinet of Mr. Chandrasekhar briefly in the 89-90 kind of time frame, and then he joined the BJP in around 2003, and then he sort of got into limelight once he was appointed as the governor of West Bengal, right? And his tenure tenure has been marked with a lot of conflict with TMC and Mamta Banerjee, right? So he has been outspoken on cases of political violence, corruption, and so on. So much so that it's quite hilarious that people said that Mamta Banerjee had blocked him on Twitter or something like that, right? She also passed a law in the assembly so that the governor can no longer be the chancellor of all state universities. Typically, governors are the chancellors, right? And so she passed a law so that Mr. Dhankar can no longer be the chancellor of all West Bengal universities. So yeah, his tenure has been marked with a lot of conflict with the ruling party there. He's also tried to make the governor's house like the people's house, and allowed much more access to the common public at large, right, to visit and maybe have interactions with the governor. So yeah, definitely an interesting personality. I think he's quite an articulate person in both Hindi and English. So his role as vice president requires that, right? Because you are basically the speaker of the Rajya Sabha, right? And so just like Mr. Naidu did a good job on that front as well, right? I think if elected, Jagdeep Dhankar will also prove to be pretty good in terms of conducting the proceedings of the Rajya Sabha.
And finally, the Chief Justice of India, N.V. Ramana, has responded to concerns raised by the Union Minister for Law and Justice, Mr. Kiran Rijiju. He stated that the non-filling up of judicial vacancies was a major reason for the pending of cases in the country. Ramana and Rijiju were attending the All India Legal Services Authority meet at Jaipur. CJI Ramana also called for steps to address the grave issues of the high number of under trial prisoners that is affecting the criminal justice system. He described jails as, to quote, black boxes, and said that prisons have a different impact on different categories of prisoners. Mr. Ramana also said that prolonged incarceration in huge numbers without a trial needs attention. However, he said that the goal should not be limited to enabling the early release of under trial prisoners. Abhishek, I mean, we spoke about this, a few weeklies back as well. There's this strange kind of a tension between the judiciary and the executive, right? I mean, which is kind of perennial. I guess it dates back to well before this government as well. But yeah, I mean, you see these remarks being exchanged. What do you think?
Yeah, so these remarks happened when both of them were in attending the same program, right? So Mr. Rijiju made the talking point that there are 5 crore pending cases in India, and that is a concern, etc., etc. And so the Chief Justice of India also said that I cannot let that comment pass without giving a reply to it, right? And so he basically said that the blame is on the executive because they have not been appointing all the vacancies, filling up all the vacancies of judicial officers and judges at various lower courts throughout the country, right? And I guess both are right. It's like a chicken and egg problem. I think the one thing the judiciary in India makes comments and remarks on all sorts of topics. The only thing they don't talk about is that in the current system now it seems they are not accountable to anyone, right? And so it's a sort of unique situation that has developed over the years, how the judiciary has developed in India, right? And so yeah, I think this tension will continue, right? Because we have on one hand very powerful government in terms of its mandate, right, with getting elected in large numbers, but at the same time often the judiciary takes the front foot or initiative on many cases, right? Often sometimes encroaching on the area of the executive as well, right? Passing remarks and comments and judgments on all sorts of manners, right? The other thing that he talked about is also an interesting topic, right? Which is that, I mean, I think all of us would can sympathize, right? That there are many people who languish in prisons as under trials, without getting proper trial. But it's all part of the same systemic problem, right? Where there is a lack of judicial capacity, there is a big backlog of cases, and so everything is getting delayed, right? Even not only do cases not get resolved, but also our police work and things like that, right? To move the process along along quicker, that is also impacted. And so, judicial reform and police reforms also have to sort of go hand in hand. Unfortunately, I think there is not really enough political gain or capital sort of to accrue by working on these things, right? Because people really don't know, right? Like if you try to reform the judiciary, chances are the chief justices will sort of strike back, right? And so everyone wants to sort of people to focus on things that do not bother them, right? Directly. And so there's a bit of the blame being passed around instead of people saying, okay, these are three things that we will do, right? You are the chief justice of India. I mean, you are also a very powerful person, right? And so he didn't really talk about what three things he would do, right, to improve the situation today. And so yeah, I mean, it's a bit of an unfortunate situation, and a comment on the rather poor state of our judicial reforms and police reforms as well.
No, I think we're a young democracy relatively, right? And I think plenty of these things have to be reformed. Police reforms, judicial reforms. God knows there are half a dozen other things that require reforms. Right? Hopefully, saner minds prevail, and we're able to work through these issues in a bipartisan way. All right, so that brings us to the end of the weekly. We have a couple of interesting episodes coming up. I spoke to Abhishek Murarka, who's the head of growth and community at Multiply, which is a social network for investors, exclusively for investors. Abhishek, who is at Abhi Murarka, ABHY Murarka, Murarka, and Multiply post some of the most interesting and useful and insightful content on equity and markets and economy on Twitter. Definitely follow them. And we had a long, wide-ranging conversation on how to invest. How does some of these macro things affect us, and some of the sectors he's bullish on. So yeah, for new investors, and we've had record number of investors coming into the market over the last couple of years. This could be a very good primer for you to understand how the markets work. So definitely check that out. We also have prominent author and social activist from the Pasmanda Muslim community, Mr. Fayaz Ahmed Faizi, who's going to be appearing on Bharatvaarta. Sharan Shetty of Swaraja will be interviewing him. By the way, I'm not sure if you guys checked out this feature called Sources Say by Swaraja, right? I mean, they featured Prakash Belavadi, the actor, and it seems to be a very fun sort of a YouTube segment that they've launched. Definitely check that out. So yeah, we'll have Mr. Fayaz on the podcast as well. If you have any questions, please do let us know. Yeah, so a lot of interesting comments. I mean, a lot of interesting content coming up. So from Nirav, Abhishek, and myself,
Just want to
yeah.
add one thing. So while we were having this podcast, PV Sindhu just won the women's singles in the
Oh
Singapore
wow,
Badminton Open. So beat Wang Zheyi of China in 3 sets. So that just popped up.
amazing,
So yes, like Sindhu, this is like part of the Super Series where there are like equivalent, like in tennis, how you have 4 Grand Slams. In badminton, you have 13, and one of them is held in Singapore right now. In previous years, I want to see those games supporting Saina Nehwal and our men's badminton players P Kashyap, but this time I kind of missed it. And yeah, so that's another good news to before we end this episode.
yeah. And also we had the long jumper Sri Shankar qualify for the World Championships as well, right? So
Yes, and he came seventh in the finals with the longest jump. His record of 7.96 meters, where the gold was 8.36. But that's the first one Indian who's reached the final eight, right? So that itself is an achievement. Hopefully, he gets us a medal in upcoming Commonwealth Games or Asian Games, etc. So
fantastic. That's a great note to end the podcast on. Again, thank you so much for your support, folks. Really means a lot for all of us here at Bharatvaarta. Keep your content, keep your comments, suggestions, all of those coming in. You can reach out to us on social media. We're at Bharatvaarta on all platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. See you next week. Have a great week ahead. Thank you.